Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing well, King. Good to be here with you as always on a Wednesday morning. And I'm showing up with my spiritual energy at 10. I actually read your mind and thought you might ask me that question. So I figured I'd just put it out there ahead of time.
Are you psychic? Because I definitely was going to ask that question.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm psychic or if I'm just a sidekick, but it's one of those two.
All right. Well, I join you in that. My spiritual energy level is a 10. Like I said, I often get challenged to try to have it so it wouldn't be a 10. So I would choose it to be more specifically. I wouldn't choose it to be a 10, but I'm a 10. And that being said, so what's your gratitude moment this morning?
I'm grateful, as always, to be sitting here talking to you on a Wednesday morning. And as always, and on a regular basis, I'm grateful for some of the dignities of modernity, running water, indoor plumbing, drinkable water, food inside of a refrigerator, a stove on which to cook it, a roof over my head, heat in the winters, open windows in the summers. I rarely use air conditioning anymore. I try not to, but I have it if I need it. And then the blessings of good friends and family, amid a world that renders me one of the most fortunate, probably 98% or so. And I don't mean that, as you know, from a financial standpoint, but just from having my basic needs met and being able to get up every morning and do work that's important to me. And I'm grateful for all of that.
Great. Just a real quick question before I get into my gratitude moment. Why don't you like using air conditioning?
I do use it. I prefer not to because I like, I don't want to get too comfortable because a little bit of discomfort keeps me sharp. And I like air conditioning in a way that's very different from virtually every doctor's office, dentist's office, store, theater, and anywhere else I've ever been. So if it's 85 degrees outside and humid, I want to be somewhere where maybe it's 78. I don't want to walk into someplace where it's 70 or 68, which some people do, because it's just uncomfortable for me. It's too much of a contrast and it's unnecessary. It burns fossil fuels and it makes the planet unhealthier. So that's my, it's a mix of reasons, but it's across a spectrum of reasons. The primary one is where I live. There are very few days of the year anymore where I need air conditioning. So I try not to use it. But when I need it, when it's really bad in the house, especially with humidity, I turn it on just to get, because the first thing that happens with air conditioning, not that this is a science class now, so I can't explain how this works exactly, but the first thing that happens is the humidity goes and then the temperature starts to come down. So for a lot of times, just getting rid of the humidity is well worth it. But I only use it when it gets really uncomfortable, not when I'd like it to be a little bit cooler.
So
I think it's because I'm 71 years old too. So, yeah.
Are you 71?
Well, I'll be 71 in a week and a half. Yeah.
Okay. Well, is it safe to assume that based on the priority of how you listed the reasons, that if everybody did, the doctor's office, the stores, the elevators, and everybody kept it at about a 78, then you wouldn't have an issue with it? Because you said climate change was kind of last. You said it last. I'm just trying to make sure that.
They're all. I didn't. Yeah. So great question. I don't think I listed them in order of priority. The first two, like that's an example. The first two cars I ever bought, back in the days when you could actually buy a car without air conditioning, I didn't. I just opened the windows. I didn't mind being warm. If you go to Europe, I'm not the one to put Europe as one lump, but many of the countries in Europe rely way less on air conditioning than we do in the United States. The need to be comfortable and cool in the summer is a real American thing. And I say this in fairness. I lived in Tucson, Arizona for a year. I have good friends in Houston, Texas. I have family in Alabama. I have some good friends in Florida. There are some places where you really need to have air conditioning in your house. And I don't live in one of those places. Connecticut is not one of those places for me. So I respect how it can be really useful in those areas where the heat is increasingly more oppressive. It's just not the case where I live. To your question, early on, it had nothing to do with climate change. In 1972 and in 1978, when I had my first cars that were mine, I wasn't thinking about climate change. I was probably just cheap because it cost more to buy a car with air conditioning. But I didn't need it. And, gradually over time, it was nice to have. But yeah. So I don't know what the priority. I'd have to think about the prior order of the reasons I gave. I'm not really clear on those nowadays. But 50 years ago, it wasn't about climate change for me. It was about I just didn't think I needed air conditioning. I didn't have it growing up. Like as a kid, we didn't have air conditioning. We had a window fan. Open the windows at night. You turn it on reverse, so it would open all the windows and basically pull the cooler outside air into the open windows. But we didn't have air conditioning growing up, so maybe that might be part of it. I wasn't accustomed to it. I hadn't been socialized into air conditioning yet.
Okay.
And I've since resisted it, but I appreciate it when for me personally, it feels appropriate. But I would not want to be with my friends in Houston and Tucson without air conditioning. So I respect different climates and different temperatures.
Okay. All right. Well, gratitude for the clarification. I want to say my gratitude moment is my standard. I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. I'm grateful for another 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life. I'm grateful for the challenges and the problems that I have in my life, because through solving those, I gain wisdom. And I'm also grateful for, again, a mother who's passed is no longer suffering. So still in that kind of space of being grateful that she's no longer suffering. I'm also grateful to be on this podcast with you. Having the technical issues, I had challenges this morning, get those resolved, and so I'm grateful for that.
Great.
And finally, for the infinite possibilities that this day is going to provide. So I'm grateful for that as well. Now, how about you walk us into our topic for today?
Yeah. So as always, we're coming up on our 3rd year anniversary here. We've been speaking about the state of the United States of America historically and currently, beginning with the publication of my 2022 book, Healing America's Narratives, the Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow. And then we've moved into, in the last half year or so, speaking about conversation skills, how to do more good than harm in conversation. And we used my 2020 book, Enough with the Talking Points, in order to do that. Today, we're going to really bring it back, not forgetting the conversation piece, but tying it in a very specific way, and speak about the concept of solidarity. And my argument that it's something that's needed in the United States of America right now in a very specific way, solidarity around preserving democratic process and democratic institutions, without ignoring, the shadow stuff that we've been talking about, that they have been imperfect since the country's conception and birth. And obviously, we've spoken about that in terms of the subjugations of women, of indigenous peoples, of Africans first, and then African Americans, and how, while some things have gotten better, those things aren't where they need to be yet. But there's been a democratic process which has allowed things to move in a better direction for 200 some odd years. Again, by no means is it done. And what we want to look at specifically today is probably one of the best examples of solidarity in this country over the last, say, 50 years now, has been what I'll call a pseudo solidarity, or a group-centric solidarity. And that's been the movement. I mean, it precedes 1980, but I'm going to start with 1980, of a conservative movement, a Christian conservative movement that wants the country to be a Christian nation. It wants to limit who can vote. It wants to ban gay marriage. It wants to ban abortion. It has banned, it overturned Roe v. Wade. It wants to make sure everybody can have as many guns as they want, and other things on its agenda. And they've been immensely successful at it across the board. And if we have time, I'll list some names and organizations that have been behind this for the better part of 50 years now. And even though everyone within this pseudo solidarity doesn't agree on every issue, they found enough common ground to pool their money, which is extravagant, which is a lot of money. This is pre-Trump. It includes Trump and Musk now, but it existed long before Donald Trump was on the scene. Their databases, their marketing skills, their contact lists, which is part of their databases. And they've done an incredible, and their radio stations across the middle of this country, the Bot Radio Network, the Salem Radio Network, and one other one, which I'm forgetting right now. The primary way that people got their news once local newspapers ceased to exist towards the end of the 20th century into the beginning of the 21st century. But that's a pseudo solidarity because it eliminates many people in the United States. So it's not a national solidarity. And what we need, in my opinion, is a national solidarity that combines all of the special interest groups who have used the democratic process in order to forward their agendas. And all of the agendas that I agree with. The special interest groups which fought for women's rights, which fought for racial equality, which fought for and fight for gay rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the problem that the more progressive Democratic Party has, and that's the party that has fought for all these things, is they remain siloed and they don't have a sense of solidarity as they're being attacked by the Trump administration, and been attacked in a very specific, observable way, attacking law firms, attacking the media, attacking DEI processes, attacking universities, attacking freedom of speech. And what this nation needs is a solidarity to stand together in favor of democratic process. Because if they don't come together and defend each other, they will be picked off one at a time. And that's already happening. ABC News has paid Trump millions of dollars to settle a lawsuit. Paramount has told their flagship investigative, Paramount CBS, their flagship investigative news show, 60 Minutes, to have to back off a little bit on how they investigate Trump. That's a really dangerous thing in a democracy when the media begins to acquiesce to what the government wants it to do. And history has shown us that. Anybody who has a vague sense of Russia and, in a larger way, Europe, in the 20th century understands that that's what happens in authoritarian or autocratic states. It's happening here right now, and people seem not to take it seriously. So solidarity, not to leave the goals of the special interest groups. I'm not asking women's rights advocates to stop advocating for women's rights. I'm not asking racial equality advocates to stop advocating for racial equality. I'm saying you don't want to wind up in a country where you don't even have the right to stand up and advocate anymore. And that's what happens in authoritarian states. So you keep doing your cause, but you come together with the other causes that are like-minded in that they want to include everyone in the freedoms and the equalities that are promised in this country, but not delivered yet for everybody. So that was, I could go on and on, but I'll leave it there.
All right. Well, again, gratitude for choosing timely and I would say a good topic for discussion for today. As I listened to you, I was thinking several things, kind of a lot to unpack. My initial reaction is based on my understanding of what you said. We can get deeper, and is that I'm looking at starting from the Christian right perspective and their ability to build kind of a consolidate and, solidarity together, maybe with other white nationalist groups that maybe they don't have all the same agendas, but they have one thing they can agree upon. And I think that's the preservation and sustainment of white supremacy. I think that's their ability to rally around that. Now, they all have different ways they want to go about who has power and what gets implemented and things of that nature. I think that's probably where they differ along those lines. You can get more specific about that once you start identifying the groups. But that's my initial take. Whereas if you look at from the progressive side, they're trying to encompass, as you said, women's groups, LGBTQ groups, now immigrant groups, African American groups. So there's not a lot of solidarity there, other than the fact that we have to first agree that we are humans, and we all can agree that we're advocating for human rights first and foremost, fair treatment, and agree upon what freedom looks like. I think that's the problem. I think that those different groups each have their own, as long as they're going to identify by their race or by their gender or by their ethnicity or by their religion, by their political sway, being moderate left to far left, et cetera, then there's always going to be competition about who gets there, who gets first, who has more power, who's been listened to closely. I think that that's what has to happen, is they have to remove those other labels and see each other as fully human and agree what freedom looks like for all. I think that's one of those things that like I was talking to a gentleman yesterday, just as a side note, just to make a point. He wrote a book about grief, called Grief the Silent Killer. And I think that's grief is one of those words, again, that everybody assumes that we all know and agree upon the definition of it. And I don't think that's the case. Like when somebody says grief, I normally think sadness. Like sadness is majority of what grief is. And that's not necessarily the case when somebody may say I'm grieving. They might necessarily be sad. They just might be melancholy and just remembering it in a remembering phase. So I think the same thing here with freedom applies as one of those words that we all think we know what it means, but I guarantee if you ask each individual marginalized group, they're going to have a different definition of freedom. Freedom to the Native Americans is going to look totally different than, I believe, freedom to the African Americans, to the Black Americans, and to women's groups, and so on and so forth. So I agree with you that there needs to be solidarity. I'm just saying that what I see as the major obstacle is there's not one core consistent thing to say we agree upon this, other than we don't want Trump in office. Maybe that might be the initial agreement that with Trump is and his mega uh, rights right side and folks who agree with his agenda are saying we definitely don't want that. I think we can agree upon that. But but eliminating that and saying, okay, what do we replace that with? And getting replaced being out with the word from my perspective, I don't think there's agreement there. And I think that, like, even hearing some Democrats now saying that the reason, and these are the ones who I would consider to be, I guess if they had to be labeled, they would probably label them, classify themselves as conservative Democrats or more of the centric Democrats in that context, that they think that woke was the reason why we lost. Being woke, it was the reason we lost the election. So their philosophy is, well, less woke this time. Let's worry about less issues that are about marginalized groups and get away from identity politics and just focus on things that are important to them. And they're going to lose. You're not going to get. I could definitely speak for the people I know in my community. You don't get majority of 96%, which is typical Democrat black turnout for Democrats, ranges around 93 to 96%. You don't get 96 to 93% of black people advocating, supporting, voting, volunteering for the Democrats if things that is important to us are not being discussed because that's considered woke. You know, so I think that's going to be the challenge. They're not going to just say, okay, we're going to just, okay, well, to make the other side not feel more comfortable with hoping we get some of the 75 million folks who voted for Trump to switch over to us, that we need to try to not be as, we need to be try to be more white man centered as well. So I kind of needs to be a white man in order to compete with that, or definitely speak about issues that are concerning to white men, and then we'll maybe get something to switch over. And it's like that may solve the election, but that won't solve any of the other marginalized groups' issues that they currently have. So how we get there is where and I'm not saying you have the solution. That's why I think it's a wonderful topic. But how do we get there? I think it's going to be interesting. And how do we begin to really just have those real conversations without each person coming to the conversation with their agenda and their goal of, I'm going to teach you what you don't know about my perspective, as opposed to saying, well, let me hear and let me learn what I don't know about your perspective. Excuse me. And maybe that might be the starting point.
Yeah, I mean, beautiful. So there's a lot there. Two big pieces. I mean, not when I say big, I should say two kind of more general pieces I want to speak to immediately. And one is, and this is something you and I have spoken about, yeah, probably at least every fourth conversation. We've come back to this because it's my primary lens of looking at people, among many lenses, is developmental worldview, and the idea that, okay, here's the the group that's concerned with racial equality. Here's a group with gender equality. Here's a group with um, you know trans equality. Here's a group with gay marriage. Here's a group with gun rights. Here's the group with, so all these different groups. And you and I have spoken at length about our developmental shorthand, where there's a me-centric view. It's all about what I want. Graduation from that is a group-centric view or an us-centric view, where the vast majority of people in the United States and on the planet live in. They belong to groups and they care about their groups. Graduation from that, where maybe, I'm going to make up a number, but maybe 15 to 20% of the people on the planet live here. It's a human-centric view, or it's all of us-centric view. That's the place we need to get to. Now, I don't know how to get there. I mean, I know some ways people have developed to that, but your points are spot on. You're taking the perspective, your particular perspective, again, not as a monolithic black man, but as a black man, and your experience has been different from mine as a white man, and that we need to look at this bigger picture of seeing each other first as human beings. And because we've been socialized from our families, from our educations, from the culture at large to look at group centrism, I'm a second generation New York American, Italian American Catholic by birth, something like that. Yeah, I got them all right. To be able to move beyond that is a really important point. That's one. Now, the argument that I'm making, and I know that I think you pretty much accept this argument, is that if we can't do that sooner rather than later, the very structures of government that have imperfectly but progressively allowed all different groups to work toward equality and freedom, the government we may end up with won't even allow that anymore. That's called authoritarianism and autocracy. And that's the real danger. It's a real danger, which it seems like a lot of Americans don't take seriously. That's one point. The need to even just do what they do in 12-step programs. And with all due respect, if I'm misspeaking here, for anybody who's involved in a 12-step program, is you act as if you're sober. When you begin the program before you're actually sober, you act as if. So right now, act as if you really believe all human beings are equal. Begin to act that way. What would that mean day to day if I acted as if I believe that everyone is a human being who deserves equal rights? They begin to act that way. That's my first point, the developmental perspective. As long as we're stuck in us versus them group centrism, which is what the Trump administration promotes. That's what they have. They now have a guy named Ed Martin, and I don't want to get into it go down that rabbit hole, but he's the weaponization czar. He weaponizes the justice system to go after Trump's political opponent. That's actually his job. Not that they needed him. Trump does that anyway. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because it's a long, deep rabbit hole. The second piece, which you spoke to really clearly, and I'm glad you did, around, you used grief as an example, but you also referred to freedom, and what does that really mean? So what I'm currently reading and studying is Timothy Snyder's work in his most recent book called On Freedom. And I want to just give a real quick synopsis of his major points. It's a very deep, personal, political, and philosophical book. Beautiful. But he basically says there's two types of freedom. And you spoke directly to this. This is what made me think of it. There's a freedom from things. And that's basically the freedom that the pseudo-solidarity movement of the conservative right in America believes in, that we're not free because of the government. That's their argument. So we need to dismantle the government. And once the government stops restricting us and taxing us, we'll be free. Okay. The other freedom is freedom to. And that's the freedom to develop into a fully human life of your choosing. And the argument that Snyder makes, I don't know if he's the first person to make it, but he makes it really articulately. And he uses examples from Ukraine. He uses examples of people in prison. We could use examples of slavery as a legal institution back during the founding days of this country through 1865. So here's the questions that Snyder asked. When the Ukrainian army deoccupied a city that had been occupied by the Russians, where they had killed people in firing squads, they had raped the women, they had killed children. When the people who were hiding were freed by the Ukrainian soldiers who had driven the Russians out. And this is based on real things that are currently still happening. And these people came out of their bomb shelters in the basements of public buildings. Were they free? Because the Russian occupiers had been taken away. Were they free? And Snyder's argument is that until they had food, until their houses were rebuilt, they said until they had playgrounds for their children, they didn't feel free. When a prisoner is released from prison, and he's no longer behind bars, and steps out into the world for the first time after 30 years, is he free? When the slaves in 1865 were forced by law to be freed from the slaveholders, and they stepped away from the shackles and the plantation, were they free? From a negative freedom perspective, the answer is yeah, the barriers were gone. And this is, the point I'm moving towards is once Trump is gone, if he is gone in the next few years, and once people who want what he wants are gone, are we going to be free? And the argument from a freedom to perspective is no, not until we move beyond what we had before Trump toward this promise of true freedom for every human being to be able to develop fully into their fullness in their life. And we didn't have that before Trump. And yeah, I know you know that, you and I agree on this. So we have to differentiate between freedom from, which just says take the barriers away, take those things away and we'll be okay. Take the immigrants away and Americans will be more free. Support them in a spectacle and we'll feel more free because they're gone from our country of immigrants. Some of whom were forced and some who chose them. So the freedom piece, I think, is really important. I could say more about it because Snyder talks about 5 forms of freedom. I'll leave that for a little bit later or maybe another podcast. But that freedom from, which is a negative freedom, take down the barriers and everybody will be free. Take down the government, which provides us with the institutions we need to be free, and we'll be more free. That's the Trump, Christian right, Project 2025 narrative. Look anywhere in the country where they've taken down anywhere in the world where they've taken down democratic institutions, that doesn't work. We know this because of a thing called history. And Americans are suffering now because they don't understand or pay attention to history. So I'm going to just leave it there because I think those 2 forms of freedom are important for the conversation we're having, especially because you raised that issue. All we have to do is get rid of Trump, and it's by no means all we have to do. Trump being gone is no better for women, gays, blacks, or even poor white people. The institutions have to work better because, in fact, in a nation that believes in rule of law, institutions are necessary. And that's how democracy has worked anywhere it's ever worked, not by getting rid of the government. Again, that's history. I'm not making it up. Okay. I'll stop. Yeah.
Well, I have some comments on that, but I want to pick those up on the other side. I want to shift into our break for our sponsor right now, and then we'll continue our conversation on what you laid out for freedom. So I have some things I definitely want to share about that. So we'll pick up on the other side. So for 2 minutes, we're going to allow our sponsor have his moment to show on our show. So take him over our sponsor now.
The playbook for growing a local business online is simple. Capture new leads, conversationally convert those leads into sales, turn those customers into positive reviews, and then reactivate those customers into repeat buyers. And that's exactly what our platform does. In order to consistently generate new leads, you first need to be found. The quickest way to get search engines like Google to put your business at the top of search results is by having a steady flow of positive reviews. With our platform, you can show up in search and stand apart from your local competition by easily collecting new customer reviews through text. But getting found is only the beginning. Most consumers choose the first business that responds to them, So unless you start conversations with potential customers almost instantly, they'll go somewhere else. That's why we make starting conversations with website visitors as easy as clicking a button, connecting you instantly through text message so the conversation doesn't end when they leave your website. And we bring all your leads, no matter where they come from, into a single conversation stream that supports text, email, video messaging, Google Business Chats, and even Facebook and Instagram DMs, so you can respond faster and more efficiently than ever. When it comes to turning all those conversations into customers, we make collecting payments just another convenient part of the combo, so you get paid faster no matter how they prefer to pay. Next, you'll want to turn your new customers into happy reviews, which is a snap with our new review request quick actions. The more conversations and customers you generate, the easier it becomes to drive repeat business. We make reactivating contacts into customers as easy as, yup, you guessed it, the push of a button. With bulk actions, you can send out text and email campaigns to generate new sales whenever you have a new update, promotion, or story to tell. We make modern online marketing simple. Let's start growing your business today.
And we're back. Welcome back to the the Fully Human Connections podcast. And coming off our break, Reggie, you laying out freedom. We talked about freedom and different forms of freedom, freedom from and freedom to. I just kind of wanted to give my perspective on it, kind of expanded my answer, which is also encapsulate freedom there as well. What I believe that, going back to the ideology of being fully human and really what that means, I think that's kind of where, and I said it before, where we begin. And so I know, again, even that's not a clear definition. We can all agree upon what that means either, right? So I'm going to put this out there as what I consider to be my perspective and how I define fully human and why it's important based off my understanding of what I learned from you as well. I look at, I put it around leadership. So I think that people who take on the identity of identifying themselves as fully human are putting themselves in a leadership role with that perspective to begin with. You're separating yourself from your cultural givens as you talk about your way you were taught, the way you were raised. So I say fully human leadership is a reclamation, a return to the truth that we are not here to dominate, compete, or prove our worth, but to co-create systems rooted in dignity, truth, and shared purpose. It begins when we share the labels that divide us and embrace our innate identity as creative, connected, and conscious beings. At its core, fully human leadership invites us to lead with wholeness, multiplying possibility by choosing connection over control and collaboration over competition. And then finally, I want to add this as I look at my brief definition of it is, I define fully human by stating that we were never meant to be reduced to a color, a category, or a competition. And we were born fully human, creative, connected, conscious. Being fully human is the one true identity that true equity begins when we shed labels and return to the identity beneath them. As long as and I think words are important. When we say human race, again, you look at what race means competition. So as long as I identify by my race, then I'm always, no matter what I try to say my intentions may be, but I'm always going to look out for the best interests of my race. It's almost universal and to be expected. That's why I think it's so important not to identify by race first. I mean, race can be my blackness is it's a way of describing me, but it's not the way. It's kind of like saying, well, I have black clothes on, but that doesn't define who I am just because I have black clothes on, and that's what I mean when I say that. It's just a description, and it's going to bring culture and context to maybe how I behave, how I may speak, and what my interests may be. But being growth minded and seeing myself as a human being means I'm always evolving, and I don't use that as a way of distancing, distancing, distancing myself from you or separating myself from you because you may not necessarily have the same race, you know. And so now, within that context, desire to want to get there, because again, if we talk about, I break things down into white supremacy's control or race control over three core things. That's the resources, the land, and the power. And some may argue that land and resources can be the same, but I'm separating them two because of how they function in the white supremacist system. So now, if we're saying that we're going to come and form solidarity among the different groups, then we must be willing to say that as human beings, we have to rewrite how we look at how power, resources, land are shared or owned or controlled. Then we can begin to talk about how we begin to work together. Because as long as one person, one race has control of all three, then it's a matter of we're only going to be able to go as far as the whims of the controlling race, whoever race they may be, down the road. And I'm not advocating that one race should. I'm saying that no race should, by the definition of race. It should be human beings are in control because they're defining laws and rules based off humanity, what's fair and what's equitable, as all humans can thrive from that. Because I see certain challenges. I don't think that if we hit the ground and communication, that most people are going to be able to agree upon. Like, for example, I thought immigration. I was watching this show, which I had heard about for years. It's a great show. I finally got a chance to watch it because my T-Mobile account now has given me free Apple TV. And so I said, okay, I'll take it. And I started watching a show called Ted Lasso. It's a wonderful show. I mean, it's beautifully written, perfectly acted, and it's a feel-good show. And I remember one of the comments I read, it said, is everything that Americans hate, two things that Americans hate, uh, football and kindness, you know. So, but my point, there's an episode, one of the episodes where there's African immigrant, Nigerian immigrant to Great Britain, and he's upset because Great Britain's policy is how they treating the way immigrants come into the country, and he feels that, you know, as an immigrant, that we should just be having an open door policy. People should be able to just come as they want, whether it's a raft or as a plane, and because he's an immigrant, that makes sense to him that it should just be open doors. Where if you look at someone who's born in that country, like the United States, for example, I don't feel that we should just open our borders and let everybody in who wants to come in. I think we should have a definitely immigration policy, and I think we should do it in a more humane process. What's the most humane process? I think should always be the lens that we put things through, right? Like what Trump did to folks who are rounding people up and sending them to prison in El Salvador, and you could argue whether or not he had a green card and all these other things. The fact what you can't argue is that's inhumane. To say I'm gonna lock you up in prison for life without giving them at least an opportunity and say you got 60 days to get things worked out or get out of the country. At least give him a warning, but just to capture him, lock him up, and then send him away without any. They're just inhumane. So that's where I'm going with this. This, as I bring this to my point to a close, as long as we can talk about solidarity, but always from the lens and perspective of what's humane and just for all.
Yeah, I mean, beautiful. I mean, I agree with that. As a quick note too, which is, I'll just say this, and I want to comment specifically on that, that humane approach. One of the real ironies of the deportations and what people are saying now and what's been in the news in the last 3 months plus is that Trump isn't deporting any more people than Biden did. He's just making a spectacle out of it and doing it without due process. But in terms of the Biden administration, they were deporting just to Colombia 2 planefuls a week of Colombian deportees to Colombia, though. So no, they were sent back to their country, where if they were in trouble there, they were in trouble there. If they weren't in trouble, they were just back in their country. But Trump is making it into a spectacle in which his administration, people that support him, find delight in watching the suffering of others. They do. I mean, there's no other way to say it. They find joy in inhumane approaches to other human beings. If they didn't, they would not do what they're doing. There's no reason for it. Prior to Donald Trump's administration, if somebody's visa was going to be revoked for some reason, they either received a letter from the federal government or an email saying, blah, 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 you need to report to so-and-so, wherever, your visa is being revoked for the following reasons. You have access to due process. I don't know the details of how that works. So you need to report and, either get deported or make your case. And then they would get an immigration attorney and they would show up. As you said, they just scoop people off the street in unmarked cars with ICE agents in plain clothes with masks on, which, brings us back to, the 1930s and 40s in Eastern Europe. So yeah, 100%, maybe that's our, what do we take away from this? What can we do moving forward? And just to use your language, I don't know if I'm cutting the line here and getting to this too soon, but, the thing maybe each of us can do is when you encounter any other human being, those who are your family and friends who are most familiar, your coworkers, however your life is structured, or a stranger on the street, or a stranger in the car next to you, or the stranger who cuts you off on the acceleration lane, getting onto the highway. Pick one. Doesn't matter who it is. Any human being. Begin to act as if you recognize and honor the humanity of that person. If it's your spouse and you just had an argument, honor your spouse's humanity. One way to do it is think of this person as an infant or a toddler, or somewhere in early childhood, between birth and 6 or 7 years old, because every one of us shares that experience. And those who grow to do harm toward others, at whatever scale, in whatever capacity, had something happen to them, probably early on, that allowed them to grow into this adult who does harm to others, who doesn't see the dignity and humanity in every human being. So the homework is act as if you're fully human and that you respect the dignity and humanity of everybody you encounter, even those who are careless. And somebody who's making a mistake, somebody who flips you the bird, like, when you're driving, whatever. I've heard people do that. I've never actually seen it or done it myself in the last decade or two. But quite seriously, just remembering that moment. A great example, and I'll leave it here. And sometimes you see somebody in a minivan, and a friend of mine who had a young child at the time brought this to my attention. This is 30 years ago. Somebody who's driving erratically in a minivan and they're driving you crazy. Like they're stop and go, they're going too slow, whatever it is. And then if you pass them, you see, and there's this woman with 2 kids in child seats, so she's keeping them safe, and another one who's a little bit older, who's old enough to be in the front seat in the seatbelt, and she's managing these 3 kids in her car when she's driving. And say, okay, I can have a little bit, not that it's okay if she drives carelessly and hits things and other people, but I understand that. I was ready to curse at her and flip the bird. I'm making this up now, this part. And I say, there's a woman who's working it, man, just trying to keep her kids safe. She has them strapped in. She's driving somewhere or whatever. Oh, that explains why she was driving so slow, or she forgot to signal or whatever. So we never, we don't know the full story of everyone. And there were great stories like that in Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I'm not going to go into those stories now, but he tells 2 or 3 in that book that just bring you back. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that's what was happening here. There's a one, from the subway story. It's one that comes to mind. Right. So that's the homework. Act as if you respect your own dignity and humanity and that of every other human being you encounter, including those who are doing bad things in the world. You can disagree with them, you can fight against them, but they're human too. If they need to be imprisoned, if they need to be impeached, if they need to be removed from office, great, but they're human. So, and that's hard work. That's a hard one to do. It's one thing with the mother in the car with the 3 kids. Okay, most people can do that one. But try it with Elon Musk. Try it with Donald Trump. Try it with Kristi Noem, who doesn't know what habeas corpus is, as the director of Homeland Security, who embarrassed herself in Congress yesterday.
I think seeing the humanity in them is like the PhD level of.
Well, it is. It really is. Either you can do it for other human beings or you can't. Begin with the easy one. That's a Buddhist teacher. Offer loving kindness first to your friends and family, then to yourself if you can, and then to people you perceive as enemies. You got to start where you are. Start with the elementary school level or the pre-K level, and you move up. You're exactly right. It's postdoctoral work to extend that humanity and dignity to the people who are doing harm in the world.
And I know that's one of the things that I wrestle with as a human being is seeing the humanity in someone who doesn't see the humanity in me and still being able to see the humanity in them. Because it's easy to, and I do this on a daily basis, meet people from all around the world and build connections with individuals who I have no idea who my first interaction with them is over a Zoom meeting. Right. But yet and still, because of the fact is, our bios and profiles say that we adhere to a certain ideology, but on the call and actually behaving that way is another thing. And so it's easy for me to now connect with people who are aligned with me, and we can see each other as human beings. It's a wonderful experience, both intrinsically and extrinsically. But like I said, and maybe it's my cultural givens kicking in, my challenge would always be to see, again, people who clearly don't see me or anyone else as fully human. I just make this point quickly. I know we're getting ready at the top of the hour. Like I saw another movie called 99 Homes. I don't know if I made this point before. And just quickly, the synopsis of the movie is based off the 2008 housing market when it crashed. And the premise of the movie is there's this real estate developer that goes around. He's buying up these houses of people who are losing their homes to foreclosure, and so he buys the contract from the lender. And so as long as the judge awards or forecloses on a home, he gets ownership of the home. And so he does it to a guy, and it starts off with this guy who's losing his home to foreclosure. He goes to court. The court process is just, there's so many people losing their homes, so the court doesn't care about almost due process in this context. Due process doesn't apply to real estate, but humanity and decency does. And so the judge is like, well, listen, you have the money to pay them? All right. Well, you got 30 days to appeal, but right now you have to leave your home. So you basically have to leave court. They can come the very next day with the sheriff and kick you out of your home. And watching that interaction, again, it's from the white suburban perspective. Right? I experienced it and saw it firsthand in the Black community, but this is my first time watching it from the white suburban perspective. And not once did my first thought, as Stephen R. Covey talks about, that first whisper of conscience, it wasn't, wow, it's good to see white people going through it. That wasn't my first whisper of conscience. I saw humanity in that, and I felt empathy, and I felt sorry for the individuals who were losing their homes.
Yeah.
And that's my point. I saw the humanity in them. And they might hate my guts, but I don't know that at the time. They might not like black people. They might be racist or whatever their beliefs. But in that moment, I'm seeing humanity. I'm seeing I'm emotionally intelligent enough to recognize this is someone losing something that is a strong emotional bond. And imagine having the sheriff tell you, you got 2 minutes to get the most important things you can gather and get out on the yard and let these strangers just go through your house and put everything on the front yard. That has to be the most humiliating thing ever if you ever get evicted, because you're going through so many emotions of embarrassment, of your rights being violated, of feeling powerless, and you got your wife and your kids looking at you. So just all that. So my point of saying it is, I just want to conclude my point again, is that that's what I strive to do. I don't know I can get to the point, like you said, maybe I take your class and some other classes on fully human, so I can get to the PhD, postdoctorate level of seeing people like Elon Musk is really the top of the list. It's like, there's very few people I hate in the world, but he's definitely would be the definition of my hate. If I had to say I hate an individual, his face would definitely be there, you know. And Christian Nolan would definitely, you can put a lot of Trump's allies there with him, but he's definitely at the top. So obviously that's for me, and I'm only speaking for myself, that would be the biggest challenge. But I know that being growth minded, that is the next level I have to get to.
Yeah. I don't think it's a level that you get to and you stay. From personal experience, it's something that you recommit to every day. Because like I said, I grew up in New York in an Italian household, and not that makes me different from anybody else, but when anger was okay, and not my parents weren't particularly profane, but out in the neighborhood there was a lot of profanity, and the gut level is, I'm not going to say any of it right now, but the first thing that comes up when somebody is being mean or hurting other people, is profanity. That's the first. The easiest one begins with, an M and and then has an F in the middle of it and ends with ER. That's like the one that just comes out, and it doesn't do any good, but it's there, and so you have to stop the meanness and the bullying and the unfair practices, as that's a horribly good example of the eviction process, and still look at the people who are human beings that are doing it. And that's not something that you suddenly get to when it's okay, because most of us who are decent don't want to see anybody hurt or bullied, in my experience. No.
And that's coming from somebody who's owned real estate, who, from the landlord or the owner's perspective, and someone's not paying rent, and haven't paid rent, you want them out. And see, that's what I was saying about the immigration process. My only thing is that you create a humane process. You create if you haven't paid your mortgage and you get behind 30 days, which they do right now, 90 days, you can get, eviction notice. You got, it's a process. That's all I'm advocating. You create processes that everybody can agree. This is how you get treated if you are a legal immigrant in the country. You get 30 days, 60 days, whatever the time frame is, to get things in order. Or if you don't, this is what's going to happen to you if you don't. Then no one can argue that, because you hope that everybody has gone through that process by that point. But if a person ignores that, then, so what? I still think that's, to send someone to prison for life in that kind of prison, immigration, illegal, being an illegal immigrant doesn't warrant that type of punishment. When a murderer can get set free in 7 years if he testifies this way, it's like, that to me is definitely a miscarriage of justice. So I conclude by just saying that we can agree on what's humane. I think that's the first step for everybody, build solidarity. What is the definition of humane? Can we at least agree upon that first? And if we can't see consensus around the definition of words like humanity freedom, equality, justice, then I don't know how we can actually begin to co-communicate and build any kind of solidarity after
We have work to do.
that. Absolutely, absolutely. Well, that's the part of being a human as well. You know, work is, growth is painful. There's nothing in life that we experience that's worth anything to us that there's not pain associated with it. I mean, even from starting off from birth, a woman goes to bring a child into the world, which is they say one of the most beautiful experiences for a woman that she can have. Yet still, she goes through a tremendous amount of pain in order to make it happen.
Hmm.
It's not just as easy as just spitting out gum and there's a baby. You have to go through pain to do that. To get a college degree, as you know, that's painful. You sacrifice them. You have to put forth things out of your life that you might want to do for the greater goal or this goal right now. Stand up late nights, not eating right properly, not getting your body proper rest to study and pass this test. It's pain associated with that. So I think that we've gotten too lazy in this country, and everything now is a way. How do we uh, mask pain? How do we reduce pain? How do we eliminate pain? Instead of understanding pain, it's like a warning system. I mean, you wouldn't want your car to just stop working one day because you want to turn off all the warning lights. I don't want any warning indicators to come on. Just that bothers me. It's painful to see that. I just want to drive my car until it just stops working. No, you want to be warned. And to me, pain is your way of your body, of the universe warning you that you need to stop doing something or something's coming that you need to make proper adjustments for. So that's my little rant here at the end of our show. We've gone over. I appreciate, Reggie, you shared kind of some homework. Did you want to reiterate that again, or?
Yeah, just the homework is to, if you don't see every human being as a human being, act as if you do. Basically, your closest friend, your family, people that you don't know, the strangers on the street, people that you don't like in public life, people who upset you when you're driving your car. Act as if you recognize the dignity and humanity of each and every one of them. And that's not easy to do. But in fact, each of them is a human being. Each of them was an infant and a toddler and then a young child. And whether or not they're doing bad things in the world right now or having an unskillful moment, if they're not actually doing bad things, but they just were careless, practice seeing them as an equal in terms of being the same species who deserves dignity and respect and humane treatment. If you're not there, act as if you are, so it becomes a practice.
Gratitude for that. Well, as we wrap up our last segment of our show, we want to highlight and give flowers to people who may be in the past or someone still currently exhibiting these qualities of and behaviors of being what we consider to be fully human. And so I'm going to lift up a gentleman who I believe is a hero of mine. The more I learned about him, the more I appreciated him, the more I respect him, the more I admire him. And I don't think I've ever given him his flowers on a show, so I will today. And I'm going to go with George Washington Carver. Mm-hmm. And for those who don't know, George Washington Carver was an American agricultural scientist and inventor who promoted alternative crops to cotton and methods to prevent soil depletion. He's known, or always, when I was taught in school, he would finding ways to use peanuts and created so many different ways of, how we use the peanuts today. But one of the things that I want to talk about as far as him being fully human, there's so many, but based on our time constraints, I just really focus on one, was the fact that it's been rumored that he had it's a fact that he had a very high voice, high-pitched voice. And it was rumored that the reason he had a very high-pitched voice was the fact that when he was a boy, he was a slave, and his owners saw him one day smiling at the owner's daughter. And as a way of retaliation, they had him castrated. And that was why his voice was so high. And he was able to, I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know that he dedicated his life to science. He never had any kids. and he never got married. He was always focused on studying and perfecting his craft and just being somebody who was at one with nature and really just wanted to make the world a much more beautiful place, and with us understanding how we live within nature and the value what nature can do for us as humans as well. So, and lastly, I want to end with you. He became so competent and so great at what he did, being a former slave, that you can have the most powerful man in the world at that time, which was Henry Ford, meet with him weekly. He would come and meet with him and learn from him on weekend sessions where they would brainstorm, and no one was behind closed doors. But I like to believe he was instrumental in helping Henry Ford and creating his assembly model uh, that he introduced to the auto world and changed the way automobiles were made from that point forward. So again, he was never someone that had any hate or talked about or advocated for hate. He's just a person that was about love, creativity, and just about learning and growing as a person in life. So I want to lift up George Washington Carver for that.
Yeah, amen. Yeah, I'd never heard that story about the castration in a way. I hope it wasn't true, but who knows? Um, so somebody I have held up in the past, I want to do it again because I've been thinking about him in terms of, especially the last 4 months or so, but the last 10 years really, is the late John Lewis, who dedicated his life to equal rights for all, but specifically to voting rights. I mean, that was as the head of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and who put his life, literally put his body on the line, was arrested, I don't know how many times, was beaten, I don't know how many times, who then ran for Congress. And I often wonder, like, what it was like for him to experience the ongoing moves from the 1980s forward to limit voting rights, mainly for the poor and for blacks. And then what it was like for him to see the disrespect that Donald Trump had for the ballot in his first term. And, where Lewis just didn't attend the inaugural because he couldn't respect this guy. For all, Lewis was a guy who had physical courage in terms of fighting for what was just. And I just had so much respect for him. And I'm glad that he died before the second term in some ways, that he didn't have to experience what's going on now. Anyway, John Lewis is somebody who I have immense respect for, and he consistently showed his full humanity.
Well, gratitude for that. I definitely can admire and respect that John Lewis as well. So I want to thank you again, Reggie, for choosing such a wonderful topic, timely topic, as we begin to ourselves continue down that path of being fully human. It's a journey, it's not a destination. We're learning, we're growing, but hopefully people, you're seeing some ways that you can choose to be fully human during these difficult times, which is trying to force you into, let's say, group centric dynamics and thinking and behaviors. So hopefully the fully human show is giving you a different perspective that you can choose. And until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., that's Eastern Standard Time, let's all find ways to continue to be more fully human in our lives. Thank you.